All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our monthly Reliability and Security Oversight Update. So glad to have you here with us today. My name is Maylee Cook. I'm a Training and Outreach Specialist here at WEC. We'll go ahead and start with some announcements. First off, the annual self-certification responses are due in a line on March 1st, so this is your reminder to get those in. If you have any questions or problems as you're doing those submissions, please feel free to reach out to Dwayne Cook or Jessica King to help you out, and we will drop their emails into the chat for you so that you can get in touch with them. But we wanted to make sure you had that reminder today. Coming up at the end of this month, we have our Grid Fundamentals course. This is a virtual offering of this course. It will be over 2 days, February 27th and 28th, and that will be from 9 a.m. to 2:30 each day. This is a great course to be introduced into how the electric system works and a little emphasis on WEC as well and our interconnection. Following that, we are excited to remind you about our Reliability in the West discussion series. The next one will be on March 6th from 11 to noon. And this is a great discussion series to discuss reliability in the West, and we hope to see you there. We're also excited that our Reliability and Security Workshop will be hosted here in Salt Lake, where WEC is headquartered. We're getting so excited to have you all come and join us. If you have not yet registered, we still have some early bird tickets left. So get in soon to get that reduced rate. We want to see you there. In addition to this offering of the workshop, we also have our enforcement fundamentals, which is being offered in person the day before, which is a great overview of the enforcement processes and how those work and how to fill out your self-report. It's a really great course that our enforcement team has put together. So you can do them all together, come to Salt Lake, get this course, get the workshop, and get a nice package all together while you're here in beautiful Salt Lake City. So Megan has dropped the links for those in the chat if you need to use those to get to those registration pages. Our antitrust policy. All WEC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WEC antitrust policy and the NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All participants must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in open session. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WEC strives to ensure the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WEC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact WEC's legal counsel. All right, on our agenda today, we have a presentation by Matthew Westerdale, an electrical engineer from USBR, on protection system coordination, internal controls. And we're so excited to have Matt here today, and I'll turn the time over to you, Matt.
Thank you.
Oh, also, sorry, I normally have these slides in the opposite order. My bad. If you would like to ask a question for Matt, feel free to send that through the chat to WEC meetings, and we'll ask those aloud. Or if you'd like to use the raise hand feature, we can do it that way too. So now I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
All right, sounds good. Appreciate the introduction and inviting me here today. I'm an electrical engineer with the Bureau of Reclamation. I've been with the Bureau for about the past 16 years. Next slide, please. So a lot of people I've run into in industry are often unfamiliar with who the Bureau of Reclamation is. So I wanted to provide kind of a brief overview of our agency, how we're structured and set up, so you can kind of see the processes we've developed for PRC 27, see what would compare to your agency or application, what would work, what might not work. But the Bureau of Reclamation was established way back in 1902, primarily to irrigate the West. So to do this, we built a lot of dams and reservoirs, which meant a lot of hydropower facilities. So every power plant we own is a hydropower plant. So we're primarily a generator owner, but we do own some high voltage switch yards and substations out there. Our facilities are spread across 5 different regions, and each region kind of operates on their own. They all have their little quirks and differences, but we do have a engineering service center that provides support and technical assistance to all of these facilities. So with regard to NERC standard PRC 27, we want to make sure we have a consistent process for developing relay settings for all these facilities that works for all of our regions. So there's a lot of relays we have out there, so having a consistent process helps us ensure we're developing settings accurately and doing them consistently. Next slide, please. Here's kind of a quick overview of NERC standard PRC 27. Its primary purpose is to maintain coordination of protection systems installed to detect and isolate faults on the BES. So the term coordination can mean different things to different people. For protective relay engineers, the term coordination often means things are operating in the right sequence. So if we have a fault out on a transmission line, the relays providing protection for that transmission line operate first and only trip that line, and not relays or equipment behind it or on other systems that would take equipment offline that wasn't necessarily needed to isolate that fault. So the main requirements of PRC 27 is kind of R1, and that's where I'm going to spend most of the time talking about our internal controls process. And this is really developing this requirement. Just specifically says you need to establish a process for developing your protection system settings. And as part of this process, they give you 3 options in R2 that would trigger a coordination study that needs to be performed. So the first option you have would be to do it on some sort of time interval, as long as it doesn't exceed 6 years. The second option would be if you see a 15% or greater deviation in your fault current values in your short circuit model. And then finally, the third option is just a combination of the 2 previous ones. The last requirement of PRC 27 is just to utilize that process you worked so hard to establish in R1. So really R1 is kind of the main bulk of PRC 27. Next slide, please. So here's an outline of the key topics I'm going to discuss, what our agency has established and what we utilize in our internal control process. I'll highlight kind of our process overall because it includes more than just PRC 27, but I'll focus mostly on how it relates to those requirements on that previous slide. So first off, I'll talk about our short circuit model review process, how we do updates, and also how we transmit data to our neighboring entities so they can update their short circuit models. I'll highlight our relay setting development and review process. We also utilize a centralized database to store and document our relay information. And then most importantly for our relay setting development process is our peer review process. We utilize our peer review to kind of manage workflow and ensure quality checks and all the necessary tasks have been performed as part of our relay setting development. And then finally, all this work generates a lot of documentation and information. So I'll talk about how we manage that, organize it, and store it in a place that can be used for future audits and any other future work that comes down the line. Next slide, please. So beginning with our relay development process, there's going to be some sort of initiating event. For our agency, we utilize a 5-year review timeline. This corresponds with other 5-year review requirements we have internal to our agency, but also provides a 1-year buffer from that 6-year review requirement that's in PRC 27. Another initiating event that might necessitate a need to look at relay settings would be some sort of system event that occurs out on the bulk electric system. So if things didn't operate appropriately or operated differently than expected, it may require a review. Additionally, if you have any sort of new power equipment or new relays that might need to generate doing some sort of review work or evaluating the coordination of relays. So going back to kind of how our agency is set up, all our facilities in different areas and different system configurations, we really begin with an information gathering phase. So this may also include like a site visit out to the facility, but we're really looking at trying to get the latest and greatest information for that facility, for the protection system. So we make sure that we can update any sort of models that we have and ensure that they're accurate for the present configuration. So things in this list that are very important are like drawings and wiring and input and output information, as left relay settings. We try to get ones recently downloaded from the relays themselves or get the last test record of when the relay was last tested. Other things would be like nameplate pictures, impedance information, test reports, and also reaching out to our neighboring entities. And for us, that's typically going to be like a transmission owner for the substation that we tie into and getting information on their protection system. So once we've done all this detective work and information gathering, we're ready to update our short circuit models. Once those models have been updated, before we begin any sort of evaluation or review work, we want to have those models checked. We want to make sure those models are accurate. There's no typos or missing information. So when those calculations are checked later down the line, we don't find model errors or issues that would result in you needing to redo and do a bunch of work again. So doing some sort of peer review of the model first is very important in this process. Next slide, please. So when we begin our relay setting development calculation work and evaluation, for us, we refer to that as a basis of settings. And this basis of settings is really a standalone document and report that details why the settings are set at their specific values. I know other agencies and utilities have used like calculation sheets. So it can be similar to that, but it also provides more detail and specifics to the application of their relay, the findings and evaluations we perform, as well as other simulations we may have ran and results of coordination studies. This report also details a complete summary of the applicable existing protective settings, as well as any sort of proposed or recommended changes we find as part of our evaluation. And in addition to this evaluation work, this report also includes a summary of other PRC compliance. So it includes all the necessary documentation updates that would need to be performed for other applicable PRC standards. So not just PRC 27 elements, but other protective elements related to, say, like PRC 23 or 24 or 25, and any other relevant PRC documentation. Next slide, please. So this work generates a lot of documentation, and there's a challenge to managing and storing this documentation. So we utilize a centralized relay database. This database can be accessed by many users throughout our agency, and it primarily provides all the relay device information and application descriptions for our relays at our facilities. It's also where we store our as-left setting files and test reports. And we can also link our relays with their connected instrument transformers or the equipment that they protect. So we can often provide information on their ratings and nameplates. So it's just kind of like a complete database and historical record of the protective system information for that facility. What this really does is it helps us with version control management, and we can see a historical timeline of all the relay setting changes that have occurred for that facility. It also allows us to track any sort of proposed setting changes that are yet to be implemented. So we know when an outage is coming up, we know what other work that would need to be done for the protection systems. We also utilize this database to store correspondence we generate, and this correspondence typically relates to communication with our neighboring entities, which is for us is like the TO, the transmission owner, and we use it to also store the relevant information they provide us regarding their protection system. And by utilizing this database, it really gives us the capability and power to perform specific searches and queries. So if we have a set audit period for a timeline, we can kind of pull the relevant correspondence within that timeline, or maybe search a specific relay manufacturer and review settings and information regarding maybe an issue that we see that relates to a specific type or style. So this gives us a lot of power for PRC 27 organization, but also for our relay setting development process as a whole. Next slide, please. So our peer review process, as I mentioned before, is kind of our most critical component to our relay setting development. We utilize a checklist to show all the necessary tasks and steps that need to be performed when developing relay settings. So this sheet includes things for other PRC standards, but also things for, say, like arc flash or other equipment updates that need to be done. Sometimes some of these tasks will apply, other times not all of them will apply for a specific relay review or relay setting development. But what it does is it provides a common expectation of what needs to be checked and developed, both by the engineer and by the peer reviewer, and also provides a easy way to communicate what's been checked and reviewed and marked as complete, what's been checked and might have issues that still need to be resolved, and what's still missing as part of that relay setting development process. So it encompasses PRC 27, but it also encompasses other components that are important towards in your relay setting development process. Next slide, please. So once we've generated a review of our relay settings and we have proposed setting changes that resulted from that review, we move on to kind of the correspondence phase with our neighboring entity. For us, this is typically just going to be an email. So this slide provides kind of an outline of the content and information we want to include in that email. So we provide a summary of the proposed protection system changes and the reason why we're making these changes. We want to clearly indicate what we're changing and why we're changing it, so our counterparts don't necessarily need to discover this and sort through a long calculation sheet to see what was changed, what wasn't changed, and why are they making those changes. Also, we want to clearly indicate if there's any sort of model or equipment updates that would need to be done. So say if you received a short circuit model from your neighboring entity and you notice that the transformer information for your facility was out of date or incorrect, this is the best time to indicate that those changes that need to be made. That way, when they're reviewing your protection system settings, they'll have a more similar model or utilize the same model you use to evaluate your protections. That way you're looking at similar things and you can't, lowers the risk of coming to different conclusions just based on model errors. So relevant files that may be attached to this email will be the protection system setting files we've developed, both the existing ones we downloaded from the relay, as well as the proposed ones that we're planning to implement. So this allows an easy comparison to see what's being changed. Also, this might include relay event records and calculation sheets that would be useful or relevant for the discussion with the neighboring entity. Also, we want to provide clear contact information so they know how to reach you, who to get in contact with, as well as plan scheduling information. For us, outages is when we can make our outages and clearances, or when we can make relay setting changes. So indicating when we're planning to make them allows us to try to meet those to ensure we don't have to wait for the next outage or planned clearance to implement those changes. Next slide, please. So as part of this correspondence process, we've realized that it's very important to have the right points of contact at our neighboring entities. So we've developed and maintained a list for all our facilities to know who to contact at our neighboring entities that would be responsible for reviewing any sort of proposed protection system setting changes we have. And what this does is it allows us to get in contact with them directly and not have our email kind of bounce around a company for a week or two till it finally gets to the right person. And that's going back to our importance of meeting outage and clearance schedules. This can mean a lot for ensuring or minimizing any sort of delays in this process. This also helps us meet any sort of requests or specific points of contact that our neighboring entities have asked us to comply with. So if they want us to send it to other compliance personnel or say maybe a bulk inbox, we make sure that we have that contact information in there every time to ensure that we're always complying with their processes as well. So this has an additional benefit for us is while it improves correspondence response time, it also helps assist with any sort of future system event issues that occur. That way, when you have one of these events, typically time is a very important factor. So you want to get the information from or to the right people as quickly as possible and coordinate any changes you might need to make as well. That way you can restore the system and fix any issues that resulted as part of that event. Next slide, please. So once that correspondence with our neighboring entity has been completed, we develop a summary sheet or summary package of the documentation and discussion that occurred. So this summary provides a summary of all the applicable coordination work, the discussion we had with the neighboring entity, and the relevant documentation that went along with this correspondence. And we file and compile this information into one document that we store in kind of like a SharePoint site or something similar, and allows us to search it by date and facility. It helps our compliance personnel know what actions or events rose or fell into the scope of PRC 27, and also helps them meet and comply with any sort of internal or external audit requests, as they can quickly go in there and see within a certain time period, these were all the events that fell under the scope of PRC 27 for their region or for their facilities. Next slide, please. So going back to our peer review process and to wrap it up, we have this final checklist, which is also part of that earlier slide that was shown. And this is mostly just to show that all the necessary documentation and kind of project wrap-up steps have been completed. So we've stored all the files in the right spot. We've got our relay database uploaded. We've uploaded our compliance or our correspondence summary that details the coordination and discussion that occurred with our neighboring entities. And we've just kind of put everything in the right spot. So if something were to occur, again, all the relevant information is there and can be accessed by anyone in our engineering team for future use. Next slide, please. So to walk through an example more specifically for NERC PRC 27, wanted to show an example of relay setting development and the coordination and correspondence that would occur as part of that. So for our facilities, we have a very standard one-line diagram shown on the right. So as I mentioned, we're primarily a generator owner. So for the PRC 27 applicable protective elements, we're going to have distance or 21 elements on our generators. And those elements are going to be looking out into the system to provide backup protection. So this would be, they would only ever operate if there was some sort of uncleared fault or event on the system. So not primary protection, but backup protection. And then in our transformer, we would have overcurrent elements on the high voltage side. So that's going to be the red winding in this picture. We have ground and phase overcurrent elements that are non-directional that are also providing backup protection. And these elements are going to coordinate with our transmission owner's protection out in the substation. So the information that we need to gather from them to do our coordination study would be getting information on their 21 elements, their overcurrent elements, which are typically directional, getting information on their communication schemes, and understanding how they perform reclosing as well. We found all this information is pretty is very necessary to performing our coordination study, so we ensure that we're running the right simulations and the right scenarios for faults out on the system. Next slide, please. So in our example, we're replacing a generator step-up transformer, and that step-up transformer is being replaced to account for a rewind and uprate on one of our generators. So because we're increasing our generator size, we need a new transformer. And what all this means is we have a new nameplate and test data that we need to communicate to our TO because they need to update their short circuit model. So we need to provide the impedance data of our short circuit impedance data of our transformer for their short circuit model, as well as all the new size and machine parameters for the uprated generator. So so that's part of this work, is that short circuit model update. Then we move on to the review of the protection system settings. So in this example, the protection system settings were reviewed and peer reviewed, and the resulting work indicated that there needed to be changes to our generator 21 elements. So those are the distance elements that look out into the system, as well as our transformer overcurrent 51 elements. So we have changes to 2 elements that we need to communicate to our neighboring entity or transmission owner to ensure that they can review them and ensure that it doesn't cause any coordination issues. So we've developed proposed setting files, and we're ready to begin correspondence with our neighboring entity. So the following slides will kind of provide an example of the communication that'll occur between our agency and our transmission owner. Next slide, please. So here's an example of the email I would draft for our utility. I indicate that I'm sending this correspondence specifically for NERC standard PRC 27. We found it's helpful to indicate that this communication is being sent for a specific standard. That way it's not just like an FYI that they need to file away, but it's something that is actionable and that they need to look at. Then we also provide a quick summary of the changes we're making and why we're making them. So we're indicating to them that we're performing an uprate on our generator and also a transformer replacement. That way they know to update their short circuit models, and then we're telling them what protection elements that we're changing. We're also indicating to them that we're trying to maintain the protection and just adjust it for the existing changes. So we're not trying to change the way things were coordinated before, but just trying to maintain them just for the new equipment. Also, we found it very helpful to indicate what files we're attaching. As we send emails from system to system, and especially if you utilize any sort of encryption or higher security system for email or data transmittal, sometimes it can remove attachments or attachments can just disappear. So indicating what you're planning to send to them is very useful. That way they know what they should expect and what they should receive from you. And then finally, if you can, we try to indicate when we're planning on implementing these changes. So indicating this will tell them if it's something that maybe is a higher priority for you, or if it's something that they might have more time to review and respond to. So next slide, please. So typical response, first response I would like to receive from the utility would look something like this. Just getting confirmation that they received the settings and that they're planning to look at them fairly soon. So very straightforward, but getting this confirmation is very helpful just to let me know this is in the process, it's reached the right person, and they're planning on addressing or looking at my proposed setting changes. Next slide, please. So 1 week later, I get a response from the utility. They indicated that they updated their short circuit models, which is great to know. That tells me that I know that they made the necessary changes, so we're looking at the similar things when we're doing our coordination study. But they did notice a coordination issue. So for a specific N-1 contingency scenario, they felt that we needed to increase our zone 2 time delay by an additional 15 cycles. And they wanted to do this to provide a larger interval. So this was a proposal from them to make an additional change. And they've also provided details of that contingency scenario and the results from their evaluation. So they're indicating to me that they had comments and issues, and that they need a response from me on how I would like to proceed. Next slide, please. So my response to utility would be to perform the same evaluation that they did, see if I am able to replicate their results, and if their proposed change would cause any issues for me. So in this case, their proposal to increase the zone 2 time delay I consider to be acceptable. So I updated my proposed relay setting files to document this change and send it to them so they have another set of final setting files that we're planning to implement. And then once they've received these setting files, just getting a confirmation from the utility that they have no further comments not only helps me know, but also helps any sort of compliance personnel or auditors know that all issues have been resolved and there's no further actions as part of this kind of correspondence or coordination work for PRC 27. Next slide, please. So that wrapped up our correspondence for PRC 27. So here on the left side of the slide, I have the correspondence summary document that we create. On the right half of the slide, I have all the parts of requirement 1 for PRC 27. So we've structured and developed our summary sheet to basically mirror those requirements to assist our compliance personnel to see which ones applied, which ones were completed, and which and who did each part for that requirement. So our summary sheet on the left just provides a general description of the relays that fell in this compliance entry. So we had generator relays and transformer relays in this case. As part of this work, I had to do short circuit model updates. And then those model updates and the review of the developed protection system settings were done by another engineer that was unrelated to the initial work. So Jill Smith was the one who reviewed these settings and did that peer review work. And then moving on to part 3, which basically mirrors mirrors the 4 parts of requirement 1.3. So not all of these are going to apply in each case. So for our specific example, we provided proposed settings to the neighboring entity or TO, and then they identified a coordination issue, but we also resolved that coordination issue. So we had 2 parts apply for this third requirement. So those were signed off by me, and then I marked the ones that were not applicable to this event. So in this case, they didn't provide settings for me to evaluate and review, and also we were able to resolve things before things needed to be implemented. So we didn't have any unforeseen issues or things that we needed to address immediately. The last step is kind of more of our internal check of that we uploaded this document to the necessary places, and in this case is our relay database. So as part of our correspondence summary, we kind of provide a full account of the work that was done, what equipment it applied to, a quick summary of the correspondence occurred, and this is more for our compliance personnel just to see everything that was done and have just a one-page cover sheet that summarizes everything. So this sheet basically would be attached to all those emails, might be attached to any sort of screenshots or discussion between the results of that coordination study. And it's also going to be attached to the slide or the page shown on the next slide. So next slide, please. So in our relay database, we generate a very similar summary, and this is what allows us to have all that searchable and queryable function that we can report on. So very similar information that was on the other sheet, but again, this is just a summary of everything that occurred for that coordination entry. The additional information this has is it also includes some of the information gathering phase as part of our relay setting development process. So this shows that I reached out to the utility to ask for their information of their protection systems and when I received that information. And then it has all the examples that I walked through on the previous slides of sending the proposed settings to the utility to review, when I got a response, when all that was resolved, and when the coordination entry was basically closed out. So next slide, please. So continuing on with our relay database, by entering all this information in there, we basically have 4 relays where we have proposed setting changes for this example. So we have primary and backup relays on our generator and primary and backup relays on our transformer. And these setting updates resulted in additional PRC updates as well. So this allows us to perform or allows us to do monthly tracking of what pending setting changes we have out there. So when we get confirmation that those pending setting changes were implemented, we know what other PRC standards might be affected and what documentation needs to be updated. So as I mentioned, we made updates to the 51 elements and 21 elements. So that'll fall under the scope of PRC 25. So once we're notified of those settings being implemented, this allows us to do kind of like a quality check to make sure things don't fall through the cracks, and we update our PRC 25 documentation as well. And this also assists our regional and facility personnel that they can quickly check what settings they have out there pending or what settings they need to respond to close out that they implemented and sent the necessary documentation off to have the relay database updated. Next slide, please. So as with any process, it's not perfect. We're always working on trying to improve it. So some of the things we'd like to improve is adding additional information on implementation schedules, really to help out that process on the previous slide. That way we know when things were planned to be implemented, and we can work on closing out those pending entries faster and don't have kind of things hanging out there that we're waiting for response on. Also, we'd like to be able to assign tasks and routing of our peer review processes a little bit better, rather than utilizing just kind of like a checklist form, trying to have some sort of automated or workflow process. That way we can kind of assign tasks or notify people of when things are ready for them. And as well, reducing and automating any sort of duplicate information. As you notice, our correspondence summary signature sheet has a lot of similar information as that PRC 27 summary sheet we put into the database. So if we can kind of have some sort of process to minimize duplicate information for that, that would be useful to us as well. And that's all I have. So I appreciate everyone's time and welcome any questions.
Thank you so much. We did get a question for you or two, so let me pull that up. The first one we received is they would like some more information about the database you use. Are you using a specific tool or is this something you developed internally?
We utilize a database that's produced by Aspen Incorporated. So they also produce like the short circuit model tools run under Aspen One-Liner. But there's other database tools out there like InnoServe, I believe, produces a relay database package. But the one we use is made by Aspen. But it is structured and organized specifically for our organization.
Thank you. What type of follow-up do you do with your neighboring entity if you don't get a confirmation that they've reviewed and have no comments?
That's a great question. We run into that issue quite a lot as well. We try to follow up if we don't hear back within a week or two with another email just to see if they received it. And when I mentioned the importance of kind of maintaining that point of contact list, along with emails, we try to maintain phone numbers. That way we can try to call them directly or maybe get in contact with someone else they work with just to get a response to see if they've received our coordination entry. However, if we try and we just can't get a response, we've had to just kind of move on and implement those changes, assuming that they have no comments. But before we do that, we always do our due diligence to make sure we made a reasonable effort to reach out to them and get their feedback.
Thank you. In the example you gave, it sounded like about a 4-month process from start to finish. Do you have a different, more streamlined process if you have an unforeseen or urgent need?
I would say our process overall, at the shortest, we can do it within not accounting for the correspondence, just the developing relay settings and being ready to send them off to our neighboring entity. We can do that within a couple days, if not the day of, if it's relatively simple. But for a longer, larger review, that is a multi-month or fairly long process. So if we're reviewing the relays for the entire facility and the complete protection system, that is a much longer review. But we do utilize that form for every relay setting development process we follow. It's just not all those steps always apply. So if it's just a quick like time dial change or time delay change, we wouldn't have to do all those extra PRC standard evaluations. So all that's going to be like not applicable.
Thank you for describing that. We have a question that says, have you thought of some automation for your email communication to help reduce missing one or missing any sort of that communication?
We would like to be able to implement something like that. It's something we've seen developed for other processes that we could see the benefit of. Currently, we don't have any automation, but we'd love to develop something like that moving forward.
Okay, great. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll have to have you come back. Okay, I'm going to give it just one more beat because sometimes it takes a second to type. I'm not seeing any hands raised, but it looks like we've gotten to all the questions. Thank you so much for your time today and for coming to present on this for us. If we go to our next slide, we have a pre-RC 27 controls resource available for you. The link is here on the screen. And if you were to pull up the PDF of this presentation, you could get it there, or there are the steps here of how to find that on our website. So this is a great resource we wanted to make you aware of. And next slide. We hope to see you here next month, March 21st, same time for our March update. We also would love to see you at our workshop here in March. And we do have a virtual option for that workshop. The enforcement fundamentals is in person only, but both of those are still open and available for you to register. Thank you so much for being here today, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.